Hey, I'm Chris Zeff from Make Everything, and today we're making this. Check it out. All right, so this is what we're calling the Banshee hamster wheel. So a couple of months ago, I was talking to my friend Anthony Panza, who you might remember from the van ramp video, about doing something crazy with a Banshee. He's super into Banshees. He restores them and sells them and rides them and does all sorts of wild stuff. So I had remembered seeing guys on like dirt bikes building a roll cage, which would allow them to do like basically a front flip. And I thought, why don't we try that on a Banshee? So I did a little bit of drawing on the computer. We took some measurements and then I sort of just took off. So I'm going to show you how I built this thing, how it's tied into the frame, and then we're going to test it. Let's get started. So Anthony brought me this Banshee that he had bought specifically for this project, and I used the sort of base frame of it to take some measurements and determine the diameter of the ring I was going to need to roll on the tubing roller. Now for this project, I'm using 120 wall, 1.25 inch round tube, and I'm rolling it on this modified Harbor Freight roller with Swag off-road dies. Now I'm used to rolling really heavy tubes, so I was actually shocked how easy it was to roll this kind of circle, and I didn't need to create a full loop, so I was able to do it out of a single 20-foot length. Now I was going for about a 6-foot diameter, and I was able to accomplish it in just a couple of turns. Normally it takes a tremendous amount of effort to roll square tube, which is what I normally do. So for this I was actually shocked how easy it went. A couple cranks on the bottle jack and a couple turns around, and it was easy. Now the issue when you have to roll two symmetrical pieces of tubing like this is on a bender like this, I don't have any sort of DRO. So I basically just mark the height of the ram when I'm done with one, and then I use it as a guide to check the second one and attempt to make two of the rings perfectly sized. And they came out really accurate, so I was pretty happy with that. Now after that, I was able to bring the Banshee inside, and we took off some of the original plastics and replaced them with the factory plastics, which we were going to be using, which would be important for us making sure that nothing interacted with the plastic trim. Now, Anthony wants this thing to look kind of like just a factory machine with this crazy cage on it, so it was really important that we use the factory plastics when we were mocking it up. Now, aside from knowing the diameter of the ring, there really wasn't any other data that I could kind of try to figure out in advance. I basically had to guess this whole project. So I used my Torchmate here to make some little brackets that would lock into the tube, and I could mount to the front of the quad where normally there would be kind of like a push bar. So I used the shape library on the Torchmate in order to generate this sort of little tab with a notch in it. And then I went over into the metal shop where the ironworker is and punched some holes so I could use the 1/4 inch hardware that would bolt right into the factory mounts on the frame. It was really important to me that this whole thing be able to bolt on and off of the Banshee, especially because, you know, this thing might blow up or we might wind up wanting to get it painted. So I wanted to make sure nothing was welded onto the frame itself. Now you saw those little brackets that I kind of mocked up on the front. Now I'm back in the welding shop using my strong hand tubing notcher to start notching some of this tube so I can make sort of the front mount of the roll cage. Now using a tubing notcher is super simple, and it's a really good way to get a nice easy cope when you're going round to round on tubing like this. So once I notch the tube, I deburr it a little bit and give it a softer edge. And this, again, I'm sort of guessing as I go, right? Because I don't know the angle of the actual roll cages. I don't know how they're going to interact with the rest of the bike. So I sort of have to weld and tack and adjust as I go. So the first set of brackets I made were perfect for the bottom, and I went ahead and made a larger set of brackets for the top. And you're going to see I actually wound up making these a second time as well. So you see how they're longer on the top than the bottom. That's to accommodate for that arc as we swing around the bike. Now again, I'm just tacking these on, and I'm sort of figuring out as I go, figuring out that angle, and that single point that they're being bolted to allows me to swing them, and then by using the grinder and adjusting them, I can sort of make everything adjusted on the fly. Now I want these tubes to kind of camber out to the left and the right to kind of widen the surface area of the cage as it rolls over, but also kind of give it a cooler look. So I wound up making the top tube wider than the bottom, and then you can see when I set it up, it was just far too low. When he sat on it, his head was basically sticking up at the top. So in order to fix that, I unbolted the top section, bent it forward, and then redesigned the brackets for the third time, made them just a little bit longer. And what was cool was I was able to do this all in the Torchmate's library right on the plasma table. So I never actually had to go into a CAD program on my computer and design these parts. These are actually just a tab with a round slot. I was able to create the taper, mark it out, punch the holes, and bolt those in. Once I got the front set up, you see I have the back of it sort of just blocked up on a plastic bin. And this was just sort of a little mock-up that I did so that I'd be able to notch some more tube in the back to lock that position in. Now what I wound up doing here was angling the tubing notcher a little bit so that I could account for the bend in the cage. And it gave me a really nice fit up on the back. And I just sort of checked it off of the back of the frame of the Banshee so that I could add some support bars, which would normally go where the wheelie bars would go, to bolt and weld into that. Now to make the supports for this, I'm using some 1x1x1/8 wall tube, and I heated up the end and crushed it with a hammer on the anvil. And this just allowed me to better interact with the frame itself, because where I want to bolt these to the Banshee, I'm also going to have to bolt the exhaust. You can see the bracket now that the plastics are off. I had to chase some threads on the actual Banshee because they were a little stripped out. And then once I did that, I was able to punch the holes for that section. And then once those were bolted in, I was able to transfer the holes from the factory rear end of the frame and drill some holes and bolt this bracket on. Now I coped this tube as well so that it would fit nice on that crossbar that I welded in. And I did have to do a little bit of persuading of the frame because it was a little bent. Once I had that all lined up, I could tack it on and kind of check it out. Now, it was really important that these tubes be level, so I had to kind of persuade them as I went. I had a level up on top. I didn't want this thing to want to tip to the side as it rolled, and then I could start welding in some additional kind of crossbars in the front and the back of the rider so that he could still stand up without hitting his head, and these things would sort of just keep this whole frame that much more rigid. It was amazing how strong this thing got, almost immediately. Once I started welding and tacking things together, I was shocked how much weight I could put on it, and I was able to actually hang from it before I put any of the side supports on. You really could see it starting to come together at this point, and especially when he sat on it and we kind of started to try to roll it forward, we were really getting excited that this thing was actually going to work. So now we're back in the back section of my shop, and I'm using this Rogue Fab tubing bender. Now, I picked this up a little while ago, and I've really enjoyed using it. You can see how I'm clamping a block to it, and that's a very unique kind of feature of the Rogue benders, and it allows you to create repeated bends and really get accurate bends. And I don't have a ton of experience with tubing benders, so for me to be able to have this thing work so simply and so accurately every time has been really great. Now I'm sort of just freehanding this. I didn't even calculate any angles. I just sort of bent it and kind of visualized it in my head and was checking it by eye. Macklin, you can see, is sighting it down to make sure that it's square, and he's checking the one that we bent previously so that I can get two that are the same diameter and same dimension. Now I want to make sure that the mount that these side brackets go into the Banshee are really, really strong. So what I did was I made this bracket design in the Torchmate's shape library that would allow the tube to slide through it and give me a nice 1/4-inch thick bracket that I could bolt where the foot pegs go. So you can see how there are two nice sized bolts down on the bottom. They're about 3/8 of an inch. And I was able to create a bracket that I could unbolt the foot peg, bolt these on to the frame, and then slide that tube through the bottom, and it would allow me a really, really strong connection where this thing could never really crush, and it wouldn't be like sort of a moment connection where the tube was just welded on there and suspended. Now, basically what I did here was I wedged that tube in the bottom and then sort of figured out where I needed to cut it. I went into the other shop and coped it and then sort of bent it and wedged it into place so it would have a real nice bit of tension forcing upward. And now this sort of serves a dual purpose too, because it also protects the rider if the thing rolls to the side. Now at this point, I'm not finish welding anything. I'm literally just tack welding stuff with a relatively small 140 welder, just so that I can sort of check things out. I don't want to have a really heavy penetrating weld here, because if I need to change or modify something, it'd be really hard for me to cut it out. So again, everything's just tacked into place. I go through and add a couple tacks, and then we're able to take this thing outside and give it its first test run with a rider in it. So in order to get this thing out of my shop is a little tricky because I have so many sandbags set up from the floods, but once we had it outside, we were able to try to roll it over. Now, the first thing we wanted to do was try to roll it over without a rider in it. So we literally just held onto it and rolled it in the gravel. And right away we could see that like the dimensions of it worked good, and you could see how Macklin almost got crushed because it wants to roll.
Dude, it's gonna work.
You see how it went so good?
Yo, it's gonna work! You first. 1, 2, 3. That's it, baby.
That was awesome, dude. We gotta run that back again.
Unbelievable.
That was sick.
Unbelievable.
I didn't even move. I'm just looking down like, oh.
Unbelievable.
Wait, if you guys, were you guys holding on the whole time?
So we were really excited at this point because up until now, we didn't know that this thing was going to work at all. Now that that test was done, I was able to fully weld all the rest of these sections. I brought in a bigger welder and I was able to really get good penetrating welds on these, and I seam welded every single part of this. I wanted to make sure that this thing was super, super strong and there wasn't any chance that anything was going to crack. So going through, checking everything over, making sure that everything was nice and tight. And then we went ahead also and checked all the bolts and fasteners. Anthony did a bunch of tuning to the bike because right now it still had no fuel in it, which was the only reason I was able to weld so close to the motor and gas tank. But he did a lot of engine work to it, and even still there's more work to come just to make sure this thing is running really well. Now, after all that, we had to bolt the heel guards on, and that was the only thing that didn't really come out perfect. We had to modify the heel guards just a little bit. The day that we bent the tubes that would support the sides, we didn't have the heel guards on hand, so I wasn't able to know how far I needed to push them out. If I were to do this again, I would push those tubes out just another couple inches, and I wouldn't have to modify the heel guards at all. But still, I think for a bolt-on accessory, I'm pretty happy with how it came out. You can see the way the plastics fit nicely around it too, and it really actually looks like pretty factory. The other thing that we were really excited about after I donned it with this very, very appropriate Don't Die sticker, which you can pick up one on my website if you're interested, is how well it fit in the back of Anthony's transit van. This thing literally popped right into the van, and then we were able to take it out to a park and give it a test run. Now, I wound up eventually fabbing up a seatbelt bracket, but for this first test, we just hooked him up with a ratchet strap and let him go to town.
So that about does it for this video. I don't even know what to say about it, but thank you guys for watching. Check out Anthony Panza. Subscribe to my Instagram. And, you know, we make cool stuff. Check me out right here on Instagram at Make Everything Shop. Check out Anthony Panza. Shout out to Macklin. Shout out to Lincoln and all the sponsors for helping me make crazy stuff. This is why I started the shop, so I can make fun stuff. And that's it. So thank you guys for watching. Subscribe, like, leave me a comment. See you next time.
Couldn't have worked any better.